Philadelphia is a city that carries many identities at once. It is a city of history, a city of neighborhoods, a city of grit, memory, and pride. A city where the phrase brotherly love still echoes through its streets, its schools, its murals, and its public imagination. But in 2026, there is another Philadelphia that cannot be ignored. It is the Philadelphia of rising rents, the Philadelphia of crowded shelters, the Philadelphia of overstretched systems, the Philadelphia where thousands of people are living with housing instability, and where too many residents are standing only one emergency away from losing everything. Imagine walking through a city known for resilience and suddenly realizing that for thousands of your neighbors, survival itself has become a daily negotiation. Imagine a freezing winter night when the wind cuts through layers of clothing and the sidewalks seem to radiate cold. In a city of homes, row houses, apartments, and new luxury towers, thousands of people still have no stable place to sleep. This is not a temporary disruption. This is not a short-term breakdown. And this is not a problem that can be explained away with one easy answer. This is a long-building crisis, visible now in plain sight. Welcome to Homeless US. Today, we are taking a deeper look at Philadelphia in 2026, not through slogans, not through sensational clips, and not through easy blame, but through the harder question beneath it all. Why, after years of public discussion, countless programs, and repeated promises, does the crisis remain so deep? Why are so many people still trapped between shelter and street, between paperwork and waiting lists, between brief intervention and long-term instability? And perhaps most importantly, what would it actually take for the city to move from crisis management to real recovery? Because what we are looking at in Philadelphia is not just a housing issue. It is not just a health issue. It is not just an economic issue. It is a systems issue. And when systems begin to fail together, the result is something much larger than one broken policy or one struggling neighborhood. It becomes visible across the entire city. Behind every count, every report, and every policy debate are real people living through real consequences. Families doubling up in overcrowded apartments, seniors trying to survive on fixed incomes that no longer match the cost of rent, workers putting in full shifts and still falling behind, young adults aging out of support networks, people managing disability, trauma, or mental health challenges without consistent care, residents trying to stay housed while one missed payment, one medical setback, or one family emergency threatens to tip the balance. That is why the story of Philadelphia in 2026 matters far beyond one city. Because when a major American city cannot close the gap between housing and survival, it reveals something larger about the national condition. And nowhere is that gap more visible than in the brutal math of everyday life. The first truth is simple. If people cannot afford housing, homelessness will continue. That may sound obvious, but the city's crisis often gets buried under technical language, bureaucratic language, and policy language that make the human reality harder to see. So let's strip it down. A home costs money. Rent keeps rising. Wages do not rise at the same speed. Public benefits often fall far short of real-world housing costs. And the number of affordable units available to low-income residents remains far below the need. That gap is not just an inconvenience. It is the front line of the crisis. For thousands of people in Philadelphia, life is built on a budget so thin that stability itself becomes fragile. It only takes one unexpected bill, one cut in work hours, one health issue, or one missed rent payment to start a chain reaction. And once that chain reaction begins, recovery is rarely quick. Eviction does not just remove someone from a property. It can damage credit, strain family ties, interrupt school or work, and make future housing harder to secure. A person who loses housing does not simply start over from zero. Often, they start again from a deeper hole than before. This is why homelessness is not only about who is already outside. It is also about who is on the edge. It is about the family choosing between rent and food, the single parent avoiding the doctor because they cannot miss work, the senior staying in an unsafe apartment because every other option costs more, the resident with disability income trying to make impossible numbers fit together month after month, And these pressures do not land evenly across the population. Philadelphia's crisis also reflects long-standing racial and economic inequality. Communities that have faced generations of unequal access to housing, employment, healthcare, and wealth building are more exposed when the cost of living rises and support systems fall short. That means homelessness is never only about individual circumstances. It is also shaped by structures that determine who gets stability, who loses it first, and who faces the hardest road back. In many cities, the public conversation still asks the wrong question. Instead of asking why people cannot stay housed, it asks why they are already unhoused. Instead of asking how the city became unaffordable, it asks why individuals fell behind. Instead of asking what systems failed first, it waits until the failure is fully visible. Philadelphia now lives inside the consequences of that delay. But affordability is only one side of the problem. The other side is the way help is organized. On paper, the city has a large network of agencies, providers, programs, and outreach systems. That sounds promising. In theory, a broad network should mean broad support. But in practice, too many people move through a maze rather than a pathway. Housing assistance may be in one part of the system. Mental health care may be in another. Medical care in another. Employment support somewhere else. Substance use treatment in a separate track. And law enforcement, public order, neighborhood complaints, and emergency response often operate under different priorities altogether. The result is not always a safety net. Sometimes it becomes a revolving door. A person may get a temporary bed but no next step. They may get referred to a program but wait too long to enter. They may complete one part of treatment but return to the same unstable conditions that led to crisis in the first place. They may qualify for help in theory, yet still fail to receive it in time. This is one of the most painful realities of the Philadelphia story. The city does not lack people who care. It does not lack organizations trying to help. What it often lacks is a system coordinated enough to turn help into lasting stability. When services are fragmented, the burden of connecting them falls onto the very people least able to manage that burden. People in crisis are asked to navigate multiple offices, multiple requirements, multiple appointments, multiple waiting periods, and multiple rules, all while trying to survive the immediate pressure of daily life. That is not a model built for recovery. That is a model built for leakage. And when enough people leak through the cracks, the crisis becomes visible everywhere. You see it in the shelter system. You see it in emergency rooms. You see it in public transit stations. You see it in neighborhood corridors under intense pressure. And you see it most sharply in places like Kensington. No conversation about homelessness in Philadelphia can avoid Kensington. For years, Kensington has become a symbol in national media. Too many outsiders, it is treated as a spectacle, as if one neighborhood can be reduced to a few streets, a few clips, and a few repeated labels. But that kind of framing hides more than it reveals. Kensington is not just a scene. It is a community, a neighborhood with families, businesses, churches, schools, local history, and residents who continue to live with the daily impact of a crisis that has become highly visible. It is also where the housing crisis and the public health crisis meet in one of their most difficult forms. In this part of Philadelphia, the effects of instability often unfold in public view. You can see the exhaustion. You can see the decline in physical well-being. You can see people struggling through long days under conditions that would overwhelm almost anyone. And for many viewers, that public visibility creates shock. But the more important question is not why the scene feels disturbing from the outside. The more important question is why so many people are being left to struggle so visibly. In the first place, that is where the story changes. Because if we tell Kensington only through chaos, we miss the reality. If we tell it only through fear, we miss the people. And if we tell it only through the language of disorder, we erase the system's failure underneath. Many individuals in Kensington are not only dealing with housing loss, they are also facing health problems, trauma, dependency, interrupted care, and long histories of instability. When those layers pile up, visible distress becomes more common. And once someone is outside while also facing serious health or dependency challenges, recovery becomes much harder. Public spaces then carry the pressure that should have been addressed much earlier by housing, treatment, and coordinated support. That is why quick cleanup strategies rarely solve the deeper issue. When the city clears encampments or pushes visible hardship out of one location, it may change how a block looks for a moment, but if no stable housing, treatment pathway, or trusted support structure is waiting on the other end, the problem does not disappear. It relocates. And relocation is not resolution. In fact, it can make things worse by breaking fragile relationships between outreach workers and the people they are trying to help. Trust is hard to build in any crisis. It becomes even harder when people feel repeatedly displaced, watched, moved, or processed without any lasting door opening in front of them. This is one of the central tensions in Philadelphia. The city wants cleaner, safer, more orderly public spaces. Residents want relief from constant instability on their blocks. Business owners want streets that feel manageable. Outreach workers want contact and continuity. People in crisis want survival, dignity, and somewhere real to go. All of those needs are real, but if the response focuses only on optics, then the city remains trapped in a cycle of visibility control rather than long-term recovery. And this is where Philadelphia can learn from other places. Because while the crisis feels overwhelming, it is not true that nothing works. Some cities have already shown that homelessness can be reduced when leadership commits to a unified long-term model. One of the clearest lessons comes from cities that embraced a housing-first approach. The idea is straightforward. Instead of forcing people to solve every other problem before qualifying for housing, the system treats stable housing as the first platform from which recovery becomes more realistic. Once a person has a door, a place to rest, and a base of stability, it becomes easier to provide medical care, mental health care, employment support, case management, and other services. That may sound almost too simple, but the simplicity is exactly the point. People recover better from stability than from chaos. They plan better from stability than from chaos. They heal better from stability than from chaos. This approach has shown strong results in multiple places because it starts with the condition most necessary for every other improvement: a home. Cities like Houston demonstrated that coordination matters just as much as compassion. When local government, nonprofit providers, housing partners, and service organizations align around one clear direction, homelessness becomes more reducible. Not because every challenge disappears, but because the system stops pulling in opposite directions. Internationally, cities like Helsinki have also shown what happens when housing is treated not as a reward earned after perfection, but as the foundation from which people rebuild. That is one of the hardest but most necessary lessons in this entire conversation. If a city truly wants fewer people living in extreme instability, it must reduce the number of barriers between crisis and housing, not increase them, not multiply them, not bury them under a process so fragmented that only the most stable person could survive it. Philadelphia does have strong organizations, committed workers, and examples of effective supportive housing within the city. That matters. It proves the city is not starting from zero. But the scale of the crisis demands more than good pilot programs or isolated success stories. It demands alignment. Without alignment, even the best efforts remain scattered. Without scale, even the best model remains limited. And without sustained political will, even promising results can stall. There's also another truth the city must face. Homelessness is not only a moral issue, it is also an economic issue. Many people talk about homelessness as if solving it would cost too much. But prolonged instability already costs cities enormous amounts through emergency services, crisis health care, repeated shelter use, sanitation strain, policing, court involvement, and the broader burden placed on systems that were never designed to function as long-term substitutes for housing. In other words, the most expensive strategy is often the one cities already use: temporary management without structural resolution. When a person remains trapped in repeat crisis, public systems keep paying for the consequences. The emergency room becomes part of the housing response. The sidewalk becomes part of the mental health response. The shelter becomes part of the long-term care response, and none of them were designed to do that job well. A city that spends millions reacting to instability while underinvesting in permanent solutions is not being financially cautious. It is paying more for worse outcomes. That is why long-term supportive housing is not only the compassionate choice, it is the rational one. It reduces repeat crisis. It creates better conditions for treatment and employment. It improves quality of life for individuals and neighborhoods. And over time, it can lower the broader cost of unmanaged instability. So if the case for change is this clear, what keeps Philadelphia from moving faster? Part of the answer is politics. Real change requires decisions that are harder than short-term public messaging. It requires leadership willing to invest in long-term infrastructure, expand housing supply, reduce fragmentation, and defend approaches that may not produce instant visual transformation, but do produce deeper results over time. That kind of leadership requires patience. It requires budget discipline. It requires public communication strong enough to explain why long-term investments matter more than temporary optics. And perhaps most of all, it requires political courage, because there will always be pressure for quick fixes, quick sweeps, quick announcements, quick visual changes that make it seem as though the city has regained control. But homelessness is not solved by making it less visible. It is solved by making housing more accessible, services more coordinated, and support more durable. Philadelphia has already seen glimpses of what more direct support can do. Initiatives designed to help families remain housed, prevent eviction, and reduce immediate financial strain have shown that people are often far more capable of maintaining stability than the system assumes if they receive timely help before a crisis becomes irreversible. That lesson matters. Prevention is not dramatic. Prevention rarely goes viral, but prevention works. Keeping someone housed is usually less disruptive, less traumatic, and less costly than waiting until they have already lost everything. That means the city's strategy cannot begin only once the crisis is visible on the street. It has to begin earlier, at the first missed payment, at the first legal notice, at the first sign that a resident is slipping into impossible math. And while Philadelphia wrestles with these choices, the human side of the story continues every day. Inside shelters, inside temporary rooms, inside waiting areas, inside crowded apartments where family members are trying to hold things together, on sidewalks where people are still hoping that one real opening will appear. These residents are not abstract symbols. They are not policy examples. They are not burdens to be moved from one block to another. They are neighbors whose lives have been fractured by a system too slow, too fragmented, or too underbuilt to catch them when stability began to fail. That is why the language we use matters. If we speak only in statistics, we miss the human scale. If we speak only in images, we miss the causes. If we speak only in blame, we miss the responsibility shared by institutions, policies, and public choices. But if we look directly and honestly, we see the real test facing Philadelphia in 2026. Can a city known for toughness also choose coordination? Can a city known for history also choose reinvention? Can a city built on the idea of brotherly love extend that idea into housing, healthcare, dignity, and long-term stability? Because the broken gears of Philadelphia are not only mechanical, they are political, they are economic, they are structural, and until they begin turning in the same direction, the city will keep grinding against itself. Still, even in this tension, there is reason for seriousness without despair. Philadelphia is not without resources. It is not without people who understand the problem. It is not without organizations doing meaningful work. And it is not without residents who still believe their city can do better. That matters. Hope does not come from pretending the crisis is smaller than it is. Hope comes from being honest enough to name it clearly and practical enough to build solutions that last. A city can change when it stops confusing movement with progress. A city can change when it stops rewarding fragmentation. A city can change when it treats housing as infrastructure, not as an afterthought. And a city can change when it refuses to accept visible human suffering as normal. That is the challenge before Philadelphia now. Not whether the crisis exists. It does. Not whether the city has tried. It has. The deeper question is whether Philadelphia is finally ready to move beyond temporary management and build the kind of coordinated housing-centered system that gives people a genuine path back to stability. Because if it does, the city will not only reduce homelessness, it will reduce strain across hospitals, shelters, neighborhoods, and public systems. It will restore trust. It will protect more families from falling through. And it will bring the phrase brotherly love closer to reality for the people who need it most. As we close this documentary, we return to the streets, the shelters, the corridors, and the neighborhoods where this story continues long after the camera moves on. The people at the center of Philadelphia's housing crisis are not invisible. They are too often simply unsupported. And rebuilding the city's response begins with one commitment. A stable home should not be treated as an impossible privilege. It should be treated as the starting point of recovery, dignity, safety, and belonging. Philadelphia has the knowledge. Philadelphia has examples to learn from. Philadelphia has communities that still care. What remains to be seen is whether it has the collective will to act at the scale the moment requires. This is Homeless US. Thank you for staying with this story. If this documentary gave you a deeper understanding of what Philadelphia is facing, subscribe to the channel and join us as we continue exploring the realities, too often hidden behind statistics and headlines. And before you go, tell us in the comments, what should Philadelphia change first to move from crisis management to real recovery? Until next time, keep your eyes open